So I'll just introduce myself quickly. I'm Alinafe Malonje, Nafe for short. I'm a writer, a storyteller, and the founder of Wurie Collective here in Lilongwe, Malawi, which is an arts collective that uses arts and media for social change. So I wrote a poem last year for the 16 Days of Activism, and it's a poem about sexual assault, basically. So that's what I'm going to be sharing today. It's called This Violence. Should I just get straight into it?
Yes, please.
Okay. You were under the impression that tenderness would protect you, that a modest facade would be your shield. You thought if you wrapped yourself in conservative and bathed yourself in gentle, you would be safe. You clothed yourself in an armor of meek and demure. You put on a helmet of silence and made sure to cover your mouth. We told you to hide yourself, that we were sure this violence would not come for you, as long as you made silence your sanctuary. We convinced you that this violence preys only on confidence, that it follows loud voices, sure voices, and stalks only revealed skin. We swore to you that this violence only follows the heels down dark alleys. We promised you that this violence would stalk only the glow of brightly painted lips and would leave your bare face be, as long as you let your face be bare. We gave you a myriad of instructions. We told you that innocence would shield you, intelligence would protect you, virtue would be your guard and purity its partner. But we lied, because it found you. Because this violence knows no modesty. It knows no volume. It cares not whether your skin is naked nor clothed. It ignores, it ignored, it will ignore your whispers, your shouts, your pleas. This violence has a mind of its own. I'm sorry we told you to temper your flames, to restrict your fire, to water down your pain. You're entitled to your pain. You're entitled to your anger. Because what else do you have when this violence takes everything else? When it cares not whether you are quiet or loud, gentle or firm, young or old, fast or slow, day or night, stranger or friend, it is not your fault because this violence can find you anyway. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Nafe. That was powerful. People are snapping for you, sharing comments. Thank you for sharing those words. So now we'll go over to Fatou, and also Nafe, please feel free to write your handle so people can follow your work and your other poems as well in the comment chat box. Thank you so much for that. So hey Fatou, over to you. How's it going?
Hi, can I see everyone? Let me just put this. Oof, Nafe. That was so beautiful. I just want us to hold space for a second to just, I think, absorb those words. That's this violence that has no boundaries, that does not discriminate. Thank you for reminding us and reminding anyone really that it's not your fault. It's not their fault. It's not our fault. I think that is so important. And discussions such as, tackling sexual and gender-based violence are never enough. We must have them all the time. And we must remind each other, as you've done in this beautiful poem through art, that every single woman, girl, survivor, victim should be exalted, protected, upheld, nourished, seen, and heard. And we're really thankful that all of you are here today to participate in this discussion, to be in this brave space. So thank you. And not only should you clap for Nafe for really just grounding us in, but also just snap for yourselves. Just a moment to just snap for yourself. I hope I'm seeing the snaps. If your videos are on, just snap for yourself because you're here today. This year has been crazy. You're here, you're with breath, you're with family, you're with friends, you're in safe space. You are here. So just taking a moment to recognize that we're still standing, we're still sitting, we're still showing up, we're still talking, we're still sacrificing, we're still doing, we're still protesting, we're still working, and we're still choosing to live and make this world a better place. So welcome everyone. All right, I'm just gonna dive right in. I'm really excited for this conversation. Like I said, it's really amazing that, that this is the real talk. My understanding of real talk is that we show up and we're here authentic, unafraid, and it's an inclusive space for feminists, non-feminists, people who want to learn, people who have expertise. And we're here to just have a conversation about this issue that is persistent, that is protracted, that is something that we're all working towards addressing. And we're also just going to focus on solutions and raising our voices in terms of what is really working well and what needs to continue to be done and what isn't being done that must be amplified. So my name is Fatou Wurie. I'm from Sierra Leone. I am an activist. It's interesting. I don't know what this title is. I work for a multilateral organization looking at sexual exploitation and violence in humanitarian settings. But the reality, it's not just a job. This is my life as a survivor, as a Black person, as a woman, as an African. This is just part of the journey of having understood and experienced safety. It is something that I want every girl, every woman, everyone to also have access to. And it is just, it's a right. So this is who I am, and I'm really, really honored to be serving as a facilitator. We have an excellent, dynamic, just incredibly diverse set of voices of women that are going to really lead this discussion, this conversation, and that you will have the opportunity later on to interact with, to ask questions, to have a dialogue, to challenge if you may in a respectful way. So I'm really excited that they're here, and they're all going to introduce themselves. But let's dive into it. When we're having the real talk about tackling the shadow pandemic, what do we really mean by that? So may all the speakers please put your videos on. We're really excited for everyone to meet you and hear you. And I would really love to start, I'm trying to see the gallery right now. I would love to start with Ellen. And all our speakers, our six speakers will answer the same question, just so that we ground ourselves in what we mean by the shadow pandemic. Language is really powerful. And it describes our realities, sometimes really well and other times not so well. UN Women has termed the trend of the increasing rate of violence against women and girls during COVID-19 as a shadow pandemic. What do you think of this term? And does it really accurately describe what is actually going on? So over to you, Ellen, to introduce yourself and let us know what you think.
Thank you, Fatou, and hi everyone. It's a real pleasure to join this real talk, and thanks to UNJ for inviting me to join all these fierce feminists who appear on our screens. Along the lines of what Fatou described, I am a right to education activist through and through. I have worked on education throughout many issues, but my day job is with Human Rights Watch, a human rights organization, where I dedicate my time to the right to education. And particularly, I look at issues of sexual exploitation and sexual and gender-based violence in schools and how it affects secondary school going girls in particular, although we don't exclude boys in our research. Now, Fatou, on your question, interestingly, a report that I'm about to launch tomorrow on SGBV in Ecuador, we wanted to call it the silent epidemic before the COVID pandemic hit. Now, is it a shadow pandemic? I think it's mostly a silent, really obvious pandemic that we've all been aware of for decades, although obviously recent movements have helped us put it in the limelight, and we hope that it will get far more attention in the coming years, so that there's a real change about it. But it is a correct framing. It's not shadow. It's there. It's very obvious. It just takes acceptance to really turn it into the pandemic that it really is. So I'll pause there and hand over to the next fierce feminist.
Thank you so much, Ellen. Madeleine, over to you.
Thank you. Hi. First, very big thanks to Nafe for that poem. I was sitting here with my eyes closed, listening to the words that she was speaking. And thank you, Fatou, for bringing great energy to the room. My name is Madeleine, and I work for Education International, which is the Global Federation of Teachers' Trade Unions. So we are an organization of organizations with members all over the world. And I hold a portfolio on gender equality at EI. And I've been coordinating our work on school-related gender-based violence, mostly with member organizations on the African continent. So on the question of language, I totally agree. I think it's really very important that we choose our words carefully, that we think about the meaning of those words, what they mean in a kind of literal sense, what they mean as part of a discourse and part of a narrative, and what they mean when we want to conjure imagination or push people into activism. So I agree with Ellen that indeed it's not a pandemic. When we're talking about gender-based violence, I think everybody in this room, wherever you're sitting in the world, knows that this is something that's been here all the time. Perhaps the only accurate or the only accuracy I can see in using the word shadow is the fact that your shadow is with you all the time, right? You can't get rid of it until you shine light. So violence is something that's in our societies. It's part of humanity. And it's not going to go away until we make a decision, put the resources in, find the political will, and address it through education. We're talking about education here. So from the smallest age to the highest level, this is a space in which we can really try to make a difference. I'm going to stop there because I think, yeah, we'll continue. Thanks.
Thank you, Madeleine, for shining the light already. Megha, over to you.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me in this real talk. I'm very glad to be part of such a brave space. And Nafi, your poem was really strong, and thank you for just making this space all the more vibrant. Fatou, with the energy that you're bringing in, and I'm really glad to be meeting everyone virtually. I hope all of us get vaccinated soon, and then we can all meet in person. So I'm Megha Kayshap. I am from India. I have been working on issues of gender since 2011. So it's been almost like 8 to 9 years now. Currently, I'm working with ActionAid UK as a policy specialist, and I'm also doing a PhD at University of London, Center for Gender Studies. My work has mostly been around gender-based violence in South Asia, particularly India. My activism is focused around domestic violence and sexual violence and child sexual assault, child labor, all of these issues. So moving right into the shadow pandemic, I completely echo the same sentiments with Madeleine and Aline in terms of you cannot get rid of the shadow unless and until you focus your light. So I do have my own reservations of using the word shadow because it's not shadow, it's obvious, it's out on your face that the whole pandemic has kind of exacerbated the whole issue of violence against women and girls. We've seen I'm not going to pull statistics, but a lot of UN agencies have done surveys and on COVID pandemic, and we've seen how unpaid care work has kind of really overburdened even working women who are trapped in their homes and they don't have any respite. So it's that's the one restriction I have with the word shadow. I have my I'm skepticism using the word shadow because it's so blatant, it's just out on your face. And I also agree with Madeleine when you say you cannot do away with the word shadow unless until you focus light on it. So we need to invest more resources, more energy, which currently is lacking in all of the national and international strategies and plans of influential institutions like IMF and World Bank and all of these global institutions dishing out COVID money to countries. So I think all concerted activism should be focused around it. I'll pause it there and over to Fatou.
Thank you, Megha. So all the way from India, we're going to go to Uganda. Yvonne, over to you.
So hello, everyone. I had introduced myself earlier. I'm Yvonne from Uganda, working with Raising Voices, and it just feels refreshing to be in this space. There's just something about a feminist space. I don't know if everyone feels the way I feel, but there's a certain sense of energy, sisterhood, refreshment that you feel every time you're in a feminist space. And every time I have such opportunities, they really do not leave me the same. So back to the question, shadow pandemic. I think I'll just add my voice to what everyone else thinks. Well, I take it with a kind of mixed, it's a 50-50. I could call it a shadow because, you know, a shadow comes with darkness with it. There's something dark about a shadow. There is no light to it. You're just seeing something dark moving along. So maybe in that sense, it would be a shadow. But then if we call it a shadow pandemic, I think we kind of water down the impact of what this violence is. And so to me, it's a full-blown pandemic. It's just sad that, you know, we are trying to get vaccines. Scientists are working around the clock to just make sure that everyone is healthy and everyone has a vaccine for the COVID-19 pandemic. But then I don't see people taking the same urgency for the violence and the GBV. So for me, that is a bit sad, because I think the same way we are trying to make sure that everyone is healthy, free from COVID, I think it should be the same urgency and the same seriousness we should be giving to violence, especially against women and girls. Yeah, so I'll submit for now.
Thank you. And last but not least, we're going all the way to South Africa. Bongewe, over to you.
And thank you to, something just happened on my screen. Okay, that's okay, sorry. Technology knocks me, trips me up a little bit, so I apologize. Once again, hello to everybody. I'm Bongewe from South Africa. Like I said, I'm practicing. I'm a teacher currently, teaching high school. So I'm very much alive with the education space, but also as alive in the activist space. So working with Girls Leading Change as well as a co-founding member. In response to the question, I think I take the language used with a hint of salt, in the sense that I do want to agree with it, in the sense that with gender-based violence, historically, it's always been something that's shoved under the carpet. Every form of violence, but specifically sexual and gender-based violence, has always been pushed under the carpet, especially when you are a victim or somebody trying to speak up against it. So I could recognize it being a shadow in that way, because it's a pandemic. It's a crisis that we all recognize as a crisis that exists across the globe, but it's a crisis that we're not willing to acknowledge, at least beyond just the words of it. We come out in statements after rage, following rage, outrage about, you know, women being killed, children being, you know, trafficked, and this, that, and the other. And then after such outrage, you have our presidents and our leaders coming out, we condemn, we condemn, we condemn. But after all that outrage dies down, it's back to the shadows. So I can recognize that language being very much relevant in that sense. But I also want to perhaps challenge us to look at it in the way of, you know, things come to light. And that's very much why I related to what Madeleine was saying about shining a light on the pandemic. I think for its history, gender-based violence has been in the cupboard, under the carpet, it's been hidden. But I think it's slowly coming to the fore. It's slowly going in people's conversations. We're speaking about it more and more. And we can, and maybe we can attribute, you know, the high statistics, well, the increase in statistics of people reporting how they were victimized, and more action and coming about in our communities, at least at grassroots level. We can attribute it to people having a sense of confidence when reporting and saying, listen, I'm a victim, and not being shy to say I'm a victim, or I know a victim and I would like to not, you know, be silent about what I witnessed. So I think it's coming out of the shadow, but I think it can't be hidden that we are currently living in a society that wants to hide this pandemic because it doesn't look good, or it's not relevant in comparison to whatever other pandemic the country or the economy or society is faced with at the time. So yeah, I take it with a hint of salt, but I do relate to the language quite a lot.
Thank you. And I cannot forget Maryjacob. I really apologize. So Bongewe was not the last one. Maryjacob, is your internet working? Can we hear you?
Yes, yes.
Perfect.
If you can hear me now, then I think I'm good.
Over to you. Please introduce yourself. Finally.
Okay. Yes, finally. So my name is Maryjacob Okwuosa, all the way from Nigeria. I'm a feminist, a very radical intersectional feminist, and the national coordinator of Activista in Nigeria. So looking at the shadow language, shadow pandemic, I think I actually have a different point of it. I don't think I have a problem with the language, the shadow pandemic. That is, if you see from my point. Uh, Shadows for me are things that follow you everywhere. And like everyone rightly pointed out, when you have your lights on, it's as if your shadows go off. But the truth is, they don't stop existing. It's just like our spirit, like spirituality and all of that. So terminates the shadow pandemic. I want to see it from the point that it's a shadow of what is happening. It's the shadow of the already existing pandemic, and it's something that we cannot hide. No matter how long we put on the lights, sometimes the light is going to still go off, and it's still going to remain obvious that the shadow is existing. And the rate of violence, increasing rate of violence against women and girls across the world, is something that cannot be hidden, no matter how much light we want to shine and no matter how much we want to sweep it down the carpet. It's something that will keep existing, just like the way we carry our shadows around. And at any point, there is there's a chance to see a shadow. It would always be obvious that these things are existing and these things are with us. So yes, that's my thought. And like Yvonne rightly said, being in a feminist space is like being at home. Thank you very much.
Maryjacob, you know, when you finally spoke, you just brought in the deepness, huh? She just took us to another level of introspectiveness. And I really appreciate what you said when when you were highlighting the fact, asking the sort of existentialist question, do we ever lose our shadow, right? So whether there's light or not, it's always there. I think the responses are so rich and they're so nuanced, and they really are a reflection of the diversity of this panel and the work that you do. And I think it's really important that we constantly and consistently interrogate language. And we use these types of phrases that are often coming from multilateral organizations and these catchphrases, et cetera, also coming from spaces of power, right, as activists and actors, to say, but what does that really mean? What does it mean to shine a light? What does silence feel like? And how is it important to remind everyone, including all the various ways in which power operates, right, that it's always been here. We're either choosing to not see it or act on it, but like Maryjacob said, your shadow never really leaves you, right? And just to go to the pronouncing or the resounding theme of, we have to keep shining that light. We have to keep, illuminating those rays. So thank you for really really reflecting and engaging with the concept itself. I have a couple of questions for all of you on the panel, but I think this one will be for, and it's great that this is a panel of not just activists and feminists, but educators as well. We're still learning about the full impacts of COVID-19. I mean, we're still in COVID-19, this collective trauma, we are still all living it. But it'd be really great to hear from you as we begin to see the full picture, or at least the picture, if you think about a mosaic or a puzzle, is slowly filling in. And based on what's emerging so far, what impacts are the rising rates of sexual and gender-based violence likely to have on education and educational settings? So we've seen the closure of schools, we've seen an uptake of learning online, depending on the context you're on, but how has this directly, it would be really great if you could make the connections between the rising rates of SGBV in light of where we find ourselves in COVID and its impact on education and educational settings, as many of you are educators or at least working within the education advocacy space. I would like to go first with Bongewi, actually, because you're a teacher, you're a secondary teacher. What has that looked like in your setting, and what is really pronounced for you so far? Over.
Thank you, Fatou. I think this question is such a multi-layered question, and I think it deserves nothing more than a multi-layered response, and I'll try to do justice to it. But I think maybe it's important that I emphasize that I teach high school, so that for us would be grade 8 up until grade 12 matric. So that's high school for us. And I teach in a rural community, so it's largely rural. So with the pandemic, at least, you know, once the crisis hit, should I put it that way, it highlighted so much. You know, in rural communities, within the education space, we're confronted on a daily with, you know, various issues that learners come to you and, you know, ma'am, I'm affected with this. I can't do a test today because of A, B, C, and D. That was just an everyday reality, heavy, but an everyday reality. So they have so many issues that these learners have so many issues that they had to contend with before they could just exist fully in the education space and perform at their best. Now introduce a global pandemic into the mix, and all of those issues are just so much more exacerbated, right? So we started let's start with the lockdown. So we had a national lockdown in my country, South Africa, and that was the case globally, which meant that learners that were sexually abused in their homes, learners that were going nights and days without a nutritional meal, learners that couldn't study because they didn't have the infrastructure to study from home, learners that are living in child-headed households, all of those learners now had extra time to just exist within their realities and had no school to escape into, right? Because what our government does with our public schools is they have this nutritional program where we serve them at least one meal a day. So for many learners, before the lockdown hit, we would see them, even when they had no class that particular day, they would come to school just for that meal. So when the pandemic hit and lockdown, you know, was sort of introduced, they didn't have that anymore. And so I'd have a lot of calls coming in, you know, miss, my father did it again, or my brother did it again. And what do I do if this happens? You know, you're expecting an assignment on an online platform, and instead of getting an assignment, you get all of these very heavy stories that these learners want to share with you, and you have no choice but to engage them on these issues and hopefully engage other, you know, departments to help you deal with them. But the reality is that the capacity to deal with these issues is something, unless you have been previously sort of working with learners that are dealing with gender-based violence and issues related or that come up as a result of gender-based violence, it's really, it seems like an impossible task. And then to look at, you know, the capacity of our social development departments to deal with these issues. Of course, they are made specifically for issues such as these ones, but the reality is that our departments aren't performing, you know, to their full potential. And then to have issues where now, you know, the whole community needs food. Everybody needs food. People don't have uniform. We don't have cell phones, so learning digitally was a problem. Everything became such a problem. And that, you know, just to bring it back to answering the question, that made us realize that however which way we toss the coin, these rural learners are going to get left behind, right? And that's the sad thing. They get left behind academically, right? So they can't perform their best. And the sad reality is that we're going to move on as if nothing has happened. And that's if we allow it to happen that way. So they get left behind academically, they can't perform academically. And that is something that we still have in conversation with, because the dropout rates have now gone up in South Africa. I don't know if you care to go in and look into the statistics, you'll realize that learners have dropped out of school completely. Right, and learners have, you know, some have started engaging in criminal activities, so they themselves have become the problem in society, thereby, you know, just perpetuating and continuing the cycle that we were so, trying to end, and people that were trying to be the voice of change, and people who were trying to be the agents of change have had no choice due to this pandemic, which is the COVID-19, but to become the problem themselves. So it's a cycle, Fatou, if I can respond and summarize my response. It's been a cycle that has just been exacerbated by the COVID-19 virus. But it's something that we hope to, since we've returned to our schools, we that's what we do. At least at my school, in my area, we drive out and fetch them. We find out a few learners dropped out, we get into our cars and everybody one that way, one that way, one that way, and we're going to fetch kids and bring them to school. And that's just the struggle that we've been having. Some stay and some don't. And so the major battle here is, how do we keep them here when everything else is, fighting to get them out? So yeah.
Thank you. The power of teachers, the fact that you go above and beyond, you will jump in that car and you will drive and you will find your learners. That's thank you for sharing that. And as you were speaking, I was just thinking, we live in a world that is really preoccupied with evidence-based advocacy, evidence-based approaches, and the fact that you come from the perspective of a rural teacher, thinking about the urban-rural divide. Another point that you raised up was also the stories that come through online education. How are we capturing that? How are we saying, what are we doing in terms of research and evidence-based to say that this is what's reflecting, or this should be included in how we measure high rates of gender-based violence? So I want to briefly go to Ellen, because you're the researcher here. So if we're thinking about all the ways in which we want to contribute to evidence generation that will influence policy, et cetera, what is the research saying? What is the research saying from your end about the outcomes of COVID-19 on learning and educational settings?
Thanks, Fatou. In some ways, the research is saying exactly what Bongiwe has just exposed, right? That there were already a series of existing inequalities in education that have just been exacerbated by COVID-related school closures, and that there are extremely dedicated teachers that have done their utmost to ensure that children remain as engaged in learning remotely or online, whatever method education systems launched. And yet those efforts are still not enough, because there were already so many existing problems and issues that drag children out of school. Now, I often prefer not to use the term left behind. For me, it's really a very sort of an exclusion that is driven from what governments have not done for the most part, and all the gaps that are left because of inaction, omission, lack of resources, which is also a political priority. And so often it's sort of exclusion, right? And so now we're seeing, an incredible amount of exclusion in almost every country around the world, obviously exacerbated in a number of countries that had really high out of school dropout rates. The other aspect to this is on the internet, right? And so online-based learning that so many governments sort of scrambled to launch, confusing a lot of teachers. And I'd be interested to hear from Bongiwe and others, and then I guess Madeleine and members of Education International, like suddenly being told, like, you must use these platforms that you're not trained in. And that has led, has generated so much exclusion, but also generated many other issues around rights, data rights, children's privacy using cameras, as well as sexual and gender-based exploitation through online learning platforms and all these spaces, right? And I think this is an issue that we're all going to have to tackle in the next couple of years, sorry, right now, but obviously in the next couple of years, because it's generated loads of issues. And even children who are supposed to be online are not really online unless they have a carer, often a mother or a female figure behind them helping them, right? And so it's also opened up a much broader issue about, what happened to carers during the pandemics, and how were schools able to tackle these things through just an online, like a screen. So yeah, I mean, there's so many things to unpack. I'd be interested from Madeleine. I know Education International has done loads of research live during the pandemic, tapping into teachers. But yeah, those are broader things.
No, that's excellent, and thank you. And we're just going to shift to Madeleine. You know, Bongewe and Ellen have grounded us or provided a really solid overview in terms of the socioeconomic, political outcomes of living during COVID-19 and what that means for sexual and gender-based violence and its impacts on learning outcomes. I'd be curious from your end, you know, help us really think through how we can better support what support is required for learners and teachers, right, who have witnessed or experienced violence during school closures. What does that look like on a practical term? Over.
I feel like Bongewe giving the experience, you know, the lived experience, and Ellen making the links to what the research tells us has kind of said a lot of what I was going to say. But as I was listening to them, I was thinking about, you know, we need to work cross-sectorally. We need to make sure that within education, and the other big thing that the pandemic has shown is that education isn't just about learning. It's not just about ABC 1, 2, 3 basic things. It's a whole social space that's vital to the very functioning of our societies, right? When schools were closed, society couldn't function. Everybody's engaging with a renewed appreciation for what the profession of teaching and educating does in our societies for our children. So then for me, the implications of everything that we've seen happening now is a complete rethink of what we mean by the right to education and how seriously we take that right. It's an enabling right. When you're educated, you're supposed to be able then to enjoy all your other human rights better because you understand them, you understand how to protect them, you understand how to demand them, you understand how to advance them. So if we're going to take that right seriously, and we see the millions of children who are not ever going to enjoy that right if we don't change the way that we are operating in the society, I don't think we can take ourselves seriously. I don't think we can take our policymakers seriously at all about wanting this to be a world in which we are striving towards equality for everybody. We're striving towards people not just existing, but actually living full lives. So to me, the implications of COVID-19 for education is a complete rethink, a complete reset, and a re-centralizing of what the right to education signifies and means in the lives of people in our world.
Thank you, Madeleine. Yvonne, I want to continue Madeleine's thought, right? This idea that, or this ask that she's brought up of rethinking, resetting, taking a holistic approach, because it's not, the impacts and the implications of COVID weren't limited to educational settings. It affected our entire community, our entire ecosystem. And so, if we are to take a holistic approach, if we are to reset and to rethink, we know that gender-based violence, the shadow that is always with us, whether in homes, it happens in communities, not just in schools. And even though we've couched this under an emergency situation, talking about COVID, what needs to happen for us to create a long-term change so that we improve the access to this right to education, to safety? What needs to happen for us to take a long-term approach, a holistic approach to protect the most vulnerable? And where does education fit in if we're to take a more holistic, a more long-term approach? Before you answer, I just really want to also plant one more seed for all of you, and especially for you, Yvonne. Kabir made a comment on the chat box about interrogating what we think about or how we engage with the term shadow. And I thought they made a really interesting point around tackling the root causes of gender-based violence, which is gender inequality. So how does that factor into this re-envisioning, this rethinking, this resetting, in your opinion? Over to you.
Thank you so much, Fatou, and thanks to all the speakers. So for me, in as much as we are talking about the access to education as a right, if I look at gender-based violence and what the pandemic has taught us, Honestly, I don't think I would have, at this point, I don't think I'm even going to address it from school, because most of the violence happened at home. Of course, we have lots of violence happening in schools, and we're really thinking like schools were the worst, but the pandemic has shown us that, you know, our children are not safe at home. So if we're going to start with a rethinking of the mindset, it needs to start with homes. It needs to start with the parents. It needs to start with the communities. In Uganda, we're a bit lucky that the Ministry of Education came up with a policy on the pregnant girls and the re-entry of the child mothers as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, because they realized that if these girls don't go back to school, more than 3/4 of the female students are not going to go back to school as a result of the pandemic. Like almost everyone has either gotten pregnant or been married off or been sexually abused. The statistics are like really worrying. And so when this came up, we started to engage head teachers. We would call for webinars and meetings with so many head teachers. And the reaction was, we cannot allow these girls back to our schools because, sorry, the sunshine is quite, we are so gifted with sunshine, sorry about that. We cannot allow these girls into our schools because they are bad examples. They have gotten pregnant. They are going to make other children believe that that it's okay to get pregnant and just come back to school. And these head teachers forgot the realities of what these girls have to go through. The sexual exploitation that, you know, they were the sacrificial lamb that before a meal is got at a home, a 14-year-old or a 15-year-old has to sleep with a shopkeeper because the dad has no job to take care of the rest of the family. These head teachers forgot that these children were being locked in the same houses with the perpetrators, and school was closed, church was closed, we were in a lockdown, they could not even go to a health center to access PEP. These head teachers could not see that. And so for them, they were just seeing a spoiled brat. Why did she have sex at a very young age? And so it starts with a mindset. We really had to let them know that, you know, this is beyond this child. And so when we talk about changing mindsets, we are glad that there are policies. And so we're telling the Ministry of Education that coming up with policies is not enough. It's good to come up with a policy, but unless the schools and the parents get to believe that these children have a right to education, regardless of whether they are pregnant or child mothers, regardless of whatever circumstance, then they will not study. So it's one thing to have a policy. Then the second thing is the schools need to create an enabling environment. So away from the policy by the Ministry of Education, the schools themselves should come up with their own small policies of how they understand the bigger policy and tailor it. You know, they need to address issues around the bullying and the teasing of these girls. They need to address the issues around the name calling by the teachers. They need to address even how these girls feel about themselves, these children's mental health itself. Like these girls need to find themselves in a position where they say, yeah, life has happened, but that does not determine who I am. So schools need to come up with life skill kind of sessions. They need to come up with healing sessions for their learners. They need to really create an enabling environment. But you know, they can only create that if they themselves as schools, as head teachers, as school administrators believe that these children have a right to school. Otherwise, besides that, the policy from the ministry will be there, but these girls are not going to study.
Thank you. Thank you, Yvonne. Megha, we're going to go to you because you're the policy person here on this panel. Yvonne really, I think, clearly articulated this need for an actionable, implementable policy. It's not enough for us to sit in silos and say, well, this is what the policy is. This, you know, the themes are reoccurring. Madeleine is saying reset, rethink, restructure, holistic approach. Now is the time. Yvonne is saying that's all great, but what is that? How do we translate that? How do we make those links? Because this is urgent. In your experience, what does that look like for you? And how can we make policies that are community, gender responsive, and also actionable and implemented?
Thank you for such amazing responses. I mean, it was really, inspiring to listen to like ground realities, how COVID has impacted communities. I completely agree to all of the discussions what happened prior to this. I think at the policy level, how I see education, I have really reservations in instrumentalizing education, because the moment you institutionalize education and instrumentalize education, it becomes very exclusive to only those who have the privileges to be able to access education. So this is a continuous debate we some of us have in our spaces, within the feminist spaces that we work in. So I think at the policy level, we really need to kind of actively see how the whole digital divide, we have seen how COVID has kind of exposed the reality of digital divide. Like, I come from a country, India, where there's a massive digital divide. And when COVID lockdown happened, the government said that, all of the classes will go online. And they were, media reported suicides by like adolescent teens because they did not have a smartphone. Their parents could not afford a smartphone. So all of these needs to be kind of put in the core of the policy work that we do, making sure that if education is not instrumentalized, what are those key markers, key privileges, key opportunities, resources we need to put into place so that everyone has equitable access to education. So at the policy level, if you look at the linkages between like household to community to school to like district, regional, national, global, at all these levels, we need to understand that, even if you look school as a site of change, how do you ensure that, your work on education is inclusive, not just in terms of like ethnic inclusivity or like making sure that everyone comes to school, everyone has access to education. It's also about all of those, factors in keeping in mind, the gender divide as well. Like, in India, a lot of girls, they drop out of the schools because their parents cannot afford to send them to school, because they because of COVID, there's inequality and they cannot send their children to private schools. So all of these markers of like inequality needs to be considered when you really put forward policy. I feel also working very closely with youth-led and networks, collaborations with different organizations, communities. You need to ensure that all of these voices, the marginalized voices, are at the core of the policy work. So you just cannot sit in like really fancy rooms and decide like how you're going to dish out the education money for the country. You need to center all of the voices from the ground when you do policy work.
Thank you. And thank you for touching upon the digital divide and the gender digital divide. And, a comment from Jael I thought was really important about how, physical violence, violence and physicality in person is replicated digitally as well. And how do we protect and how do we create safe spaces around that? And that's one thing, but then you add the gender, then you add the urban rural, then you add the economic. It's incredibly layered in terms of how we create more holistic learning systems. Maryjacob, I loved how you introduced yourself at the onset to say that you're an intersectional feminist doing a lot of grassroots mobilization and activism. The question to you is that we are currently at a moment, and I don't know, historically, in every point, right, there is this significant moment where we have an opportunity as humanity to shift completely. And apparently COVID is this moment, is this opportunity. As the opportunity to, I wouldn't say necessarily, we want to end GBV, but at least significantly shift how we go about eradicating gender-based violence in and around schools. So to make this, or to transform this opportunity into reality, what changes do we need to make in terms of our activism? What types of demands should we be making? How should we be mobilizing? And just, what does that shift look like from a community-based perspective? Over to you, Maryjacob.
Thank you very much, Fatou. So, yes, I'm an intersectional feminist, and we've done like a lot of work in school spaces, and we have school clubs, and I feel very proud of me to say that that we raise young children as young as 5 to be feminists. Thinking about what should shift, I personally believe that if you want to make any change, and a lasting change at that, you have to change from the beginning of it, from the root, from the foundation of it. I tell people a lot that if we're fighting for an equal education, and we are not fighting for a safe and equal education space, then we are not doing justice to the fight that we are doing. I believe everybody, every education advocate should be a feminist. If you actually would want to see this change, we should start tackling these issues from the oppressed point of view. I would always believe and would say, and I'm very sure that during oppressions, the oppressed are more oppressed. And during the COVID-19, we saw the huge gap that children that were already oppressed during the school spaces, during the school times, were even facing more oppression during the COVID-19. They were facing oppressions that had to do with their gender, oppressions that had to do with the class of their family, ability to access the digital world, and things like this. So if we are going to make that change, we should just not concentrate on the quality of education we are given. We should concentrate on the accessibility of this education. Every education advocate should be a feminist. If you're fighting for oppression, you should fight for every oppressed. And I remember something that happened during the pandemic, that we were trying to reach out to some communities, and it was a huge issue. And to an extent, we felt like maybe we were not doing something right. And it was true. What we were not doing right is that we were using the same formats that we always used. But now we have a bigger issue, and the gaps are even more than they used to be. So the formats should be changed. We should go back to the drawing board. We should ask questions. We should make it more inclusive for young people, for these children that are going to be in these school spaces. Let's not go make laws and pass bills and with the lawmakers without even asking the opinions of these people and these children that face it. Every advocacy that we do for children, for education, we should have learners and students and teachers involved in the process of it. I hope I did justice to that, and I wouldn't mind answering more if I didn't. Thank you.
No, you did. And we've got a couple of minutes, so we're going to do a quick fireball around. But I think, just to reiterate what you said, every education advocate must be a feminist. And my understanding of that is it's about interrogating power. It's about getting to the root cause of gender inequality. It is taking an intersectional perspective, looking at things from a tribal, racial, economic, or political perspective. We have to think about educational outcomes as holistic. And so I think that was a wonderful way to wrap this up. I mean, if that is the core, or that is the framing in which we go about trying to ensure that access to education is a right, access to quality education is a right, access to safety within educational systems and so forth is a right. Thank you for grounding us in that. A lot has been said that is just so rich, and we could have a 5-hour conversation. I don't think that would even do it justice to begin to unpack the layers of really tackling sexual and gender-based violence. I mean, shadow pandemic, sure, but this is what we're holding space for. We're holding space to talk about interrogating those power dynamics that prevent everyone from having access to one of the most powerful spaces in the world, a place to learn, to grow, to dream, to become. And so thank you, each and every one of you on the panel, and those that are here that are going to engage in a really meaningful conversation, for everything that you do as educators, as activists, as advocates, as researchers, as policymakers and policy shakers. Thank you for what you do. I would like to go around our panelists really quickly just to say, leave us, well, you're not gonna leave us because we're gonna have a conversation, but if there was really just one thing, just one or two things that you really want everyone to remember about what it means to tackle in a real way the shadow pandemic and the shift that needs to occur, what would it be? So we will start with Maryjacob, because you were the last one to go. So Maryjacob, really quickly, what would that one or two thing or point or thing you'd like us to know?
Okay, so I would want everyone to know that if you ever violate a human right, then you should not proudly stand to fight for human rights. Don't fight against what you fight for. Thank you.
Thank you, Maryjacob. Ellen, over to you.
I missed Maryjacob's point, but I hope, Maryjacob, would you mind writing it in the chat box? I mean, Fatou, for me, it's about information is power. And I think with SGB, with sexual and gender-based violence, you know, the more that we expose it and information is out there and testimonies, you know, no, it can't be denied. And so I think that's the one of the many huge tools that we have to take out of our enormous toolbox to stop people from denying it. And the same way that we saw with COVID and a lot of deniers, right? It's like, again, you know, put the information out there, and not necessarily that burdens survivors and victims of sexual and gender-based violence, but like all of us know that it's happening, right? And so talking about it and putting it out there, and if we can, obviously putting out evidence wherever we can to contrast whatever sort of those tough decision makers and holders of policy making are saying or denying. And that's grounded on our rights, including sexual reproductive rights, which often, you know, come off the conversation because it makes people feel uncomfortable when we're talking about SGBV, but yet are so central to our like rights being realized. So information is power, definitely. Information is power. Over to you, Yvonne.
Thank you. So for me, in addition to what everyone else has said, I really think we are dealing with something that is quite deep-rooted, something that we've lived with for years, and something that, for a context like mine, is quite normalized. That even if you went to report, you might end up actually getting violated if you went to police to report some of these cases. And so I really think we need to continue the campaign of helping people to understand that there's nothing normal about sexual violence or any form of gender-based violence. And then we also need to continue understanding where the problem is, probably more research, more studies, like not taking anything for granted and not coming up with projects and assuming that could be the response. But let's like invest to really understand, are we investing in the right projects? But then also I think we really need to invest resources, especially at a time like now. Schools and people in the education sector are really going to need quite a number of resources. Somebody talked about information being power, but how will that information reach the children? So we are going to print materials, we are going to print this, we are going to do that. So we are going to talk to teachers, there's really going to be lots of activities post-COVID to just help people like really understand what has happened and the impact it's going to have if it's not mitigated. So there will really be need for resources.
Amazing. Information is power. Put your money where your mouth is. Over to you, Madeleine.
Yeah, Yvonne said it. I was going to say that the people who hold the purse strings must show us the money, because we need the money to provide the kinds of, all kinds of services that we've been failing to provide within schools, to ensure that people have access to the services they need to enable them to deal with and overcome gender-based violence in and around schools. They need reporting mechanisms. We need adequate funding for teachers to be trained and supported to do this work. We need, and it's a real worry now that with an economic crisis coming, that already the funds that were not being made available for education will definitely not be made available. So we need to be shouting that out loud every chance we get and every place we can get into. The resourcing of education absolutely needs to happen.
Information is power. Put your money where your mouth is. Resourcing in the right systems. All right, Bongewi, over to you.
I'm just, digesting all of these powerful comments and opinions that you're sharing. But I think my addition to them would be, if there's anything that I think activism needs to constantly be reminded of, is that we as activists need to be comfortable creating discomfort. We need to be comfortable creating discomfort for ourselves as activists, because sometimes we get set in our ways. In 1989, I hated the fact that I couldn't get a house unless I was married, or this, that, and the other, which was great as a cause at that time. But we need to be comfortable enough to allow ourselves to be shaken by the fact that, violence has evolved. And so the methods that we use in our activism also need to evolve. And for them to evolve effectively, and for us to sort of put our minds together to think of ways in which we can join heads and bring about meaningful change. We need to start start shifting our thinking and at how we look at schools and education spaces. So many times I always find that people separate the school and the community and the lawmakers, and they're all separate powers. But I think it's so much more powerful to start recognizing the school as society. So when you as an activist say, society is a problem, gender violence is a problem, true, but you need to recognize that that society is represented in the school. And so it is society itself. So we need to be comfortable with that reality, but also uncomfortable with the fact that that is the reality. And so we need to, one, put some verbs in our activism, right? As a teacher myself, I can always say, I can never know it all. So if I'm to be an effective activist, an effective teacher, I need to recognize that I'm constantly needing to learn more from others, from spaces such as these ones, where I'm allowed to share my thoughts, but also take 5 minutes in silence and digest the thoughts of others, because those thoughts, once internalized, will shift my thinking. And what I learn, I'm able to share with the next person who's able to share it with the next person. And it will change the way in which I engage with the issues that my learners are faced with, right? So I need to be uncomfortable, bring discomfort into my school space as a teacher, bring discomfort to my learners. They need not be complacent, right? So with the evolution of sexual violence in our schools, within the digital spaces, within our physical spaces, we also need to evolve the way we change. And we can only do that by listening and putting some verbs on what we heard. So how we can more practically apply the solution that we come up with.
Thank you.
That would be
that was brilliant. Megha, over to you briefly. We've got about 2 minutes. Oh, no, we can't hear you, but you look fabulous. Please do type it. Yes, please do type it. I know people are shaking their head. She's more than that. Like, no, I'm just joking, guys. Just trying to say that she's brilliant and wonderful. And sorry we couldn't hear that. And Maryjacob, please also type your last comment. I think some people didn't hear it, and I think there was so much wisdom there. We're about to pass it over to my colleague Tikhala for a discussion, so this conversation continues. But my immense gratitude to ActionAid, Natasha, Soul Sister, to all the panelists for your heart, your passion, and your wisdom, and just, your work. Thank you so very much. I do want to leave you with one thing that I carry on my journey, as a way to remember to stay comfortable in the discomfort that Bongewe, spoke to. And it's a piece of a long poem I wrote for my grandmother as the first generation to go through higher education. And it goes like this: we will break cycles of violence, violation, and miseducation. For knowledge and forgiveness, know a different kind of love. So I am the manifestation of her wildest dreams. Thank you so much for having me. Over to you, Tikhala.
Wow. Gosh, that was so powerful and so empowering as well. Fatou and all the speakers, I think the session that you have just started off with, just really opening up this real talk session, has really opened up really key issues that I'm sure all of us are seeing, are addressing, are working on, or have been impacted on in some other ways. And this is an opportunity right now to hear from all the dynamic young women or all the other participants in the audience on this session right now. Your voice in this discussion really is important. I'm a young woman myself, a lawyer by profession, has been doing a lot of work around girls and young women, and the conversation we're having right now is not new. And it's so sad that even in the midst of pandemic, we're still kind of fighting the same issues when we should be saying, hey, we are progressing, we are getting better, what's next? But it feels like we still are back at the drawing board, still kind of bringing up the same issues. Where are we going wrong? But I think most importantly, I want to hear from all the people on the session right now and all the audiences to just really share what's on their mind. And the first thing before I get to just hearing comments and anything that's going through people's mind about what's being discussed during this session is just to find out from everyone. If you can just go to your chat box right now and just type out in one word how you currently feel about issues of gender-based violence right now, whatever country you're in, whatever global space you're in, with work that's being done, how do you feel? Type it out in one word, how do you feel? I see urgent, furious, heartbroken, sad. I'm just gonna give it a few moments for any other reflections. Angry, energized, tired, sad, curious, hopeful, tired, challenged, motivated, inspired to smash the patriarchy, partnership. And as these just these words are coming up, I really would want to take an opportunity just to get like one or two people who have shared, you know, one of the areas that they've shared with. So we had people sharing things like they're angry, they're furious, they're tired, they're hopeful. And I think just to hear from you, why do you feel that way? I think it's also just a good way to kind of understand maybe other areas we're not looking at, whether if it's in the space of being tired. I saw someone being tired, and I think as advocates and people working in this space, it does get tiring in terms of we keep pushing for change, we're advocating, we keep putting the services in place, we keep trying to get the resources to go in the right places, but things are not changing the way we're hoping for. But I think it'd be great to just hear from some of the speakers, some of the members in the audience to just kind of share a bit more from the words that they have shared. I think I'll just pick on 2 or 3 people, if that's okay. If you don't feel comfortable to share, that's also okay. Or maybe what would be easier is, why don't you just raise your hand? There's a raise your hand option. If you feel like you want to share why you typed in the word that you typed in, please just raise your hand and we can just give you a moment to share in like 2 minutes on why you shared what you shared. I'm going to check if there's anyone raising their hands. I don't see anyone raising their hands. If I'm not seeing anything, you can just like unmute yourself and be like, hey, I want to share something. Let's see.
Tikhala, there's Tiffany and Irene.
Great. Irene, how about you go first, and then Tiffany, you can go right after.
Hi, everyone. My name is Irene. I'm from Indonesia. I'm so thankful for this session because it really empowers me and it gives me the courage to speak up. It is so personal to me. I feel like the issue of sexual gender-based violence is just so rooted in a lot of areas, including areas like the government, which makes us feel more afraid to speak up. And in some areas, especially like my country, it's just a taboo thing, a taboo issue to be talked about. So when I speak about it to my parents or to elder people, they would just think that it's a stupid issue and we will feel more afraid to speak up about it. But thanks to all the speakers and the panelists, I really appreciate every empowered words that you shared to me. And I am now the humanitarian coordinator of IPSF, which is the International Pharmaceutical Students Federation. And I am just more empowered to do more and advocate more about women and sexual gender-based violence. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Irene. And, as, Irene just shared before we go to Tiffany, it'll be great to just hear people type in, what are ways that people are using to really give young women like Irene the voice to speak out in the midst of so many challenges and barriers that are there. If you have any, solutions or best practices, please just type them in the chat box to just also just guide Irene and just in terms of ways that people and tools people have used to be able to truly speak out without fear. Moving on to Tiffany.
Okay, hello everyone. My name is Tiffany and I'm also part of IPSF like Irene. And my word was heartbreaking because when you see a disconnect between people who are experiencing gender-based violence every day, and some are so small, it's so shocking and so tear-inducing. And when you have leaders like we do in Kenya, who disregard gender-based violence as an issue, or you have police officers and judicial courts and all these people who their sole responsibility of being in the places they are, of doing the jobs they have, is to protect these people who are these victims who are going through so much pain, that they disregard it and ignore it, is heartbreaking, like I said. But I'm hopeful, because having no hope means the battle is lost. So I am hopeful that it will get better. And I'm hopeful that the small little voices from the activists here and those people who do something small in their own little spaces to try and shed light on this shadow pandemic, as we've called it, will all come together at one point, or we'll see some change at some point, whether it's after COVID or I don't know, somewhere along the way, but it has got to change. It can't continue like this because a lot of people are hurting. Thank you.
Tiffany, so powerful. And I was just thinking, hashtag it's got to change, hashtag it's got to change. And you're so right, because it's the same thing the speakers were sharing in terms of the system is failing us, in terms of whether it's the police system, it's a judiciary system. How do we strengthen the response and even the protective and protective measures that are in place? And just before I get to someone else to jump in, I came from a school institution, university. I was sexually harassed when I was there, and speaking out was hard, but at the same time, even reporting to someone, you don't even know where to start, because at the same time, you don't even really trust the police system to be on your side. And I think these are some of the key issues that are coming out. And I'll be really happy to just open up the session to really also hear from people of best practices that have been there. Where is it where it's working, where systems are responding and taking action and being accountable to providing the crucial services that women and young girls need. Is there anyone else who wants to just share? You can share based on the words you shared, or want to share based on best practices you may also have encountered, or just even anything else that's in your mind that you feel like you want to just speak out and share. This is your space, and we really want to just keep it open, and feel free to jump in to want to share about anything.
This is Hajra. I'm Hajra Hafizur Rahman. I'm from Pakistan, and currently I'm in Cairo. And thank you. Actually, I'm here because of my sister Fatou, and it's really inspiring. I think you also reminded me of her. And I wrote the word hopeful, and not discounting what a lot of women feel, but I feel that times are changing. I used to work on GBV some 10 years ago, and I feel that times are changing in a way that conversations are changing. There's a narrative that, oh, we're giving her a voice, but now the narratives are changing. No, I don't need someone to give me a voice. I have a voice. And I feel platforms like yours, platforms like social media, like, I think times are changing or hopeful in a way that each one of us have a voice, and I'm seeing women over and over again knowing that and exercising that voice and exercising that right in a way. So I feel that's why I use the word hopeful. And I think one thing you said in the end, that what are some of the best practices, and I feel that possibly that narrative has changed because so many conversations are happening, and I feel one of the best practices for me right now, as of now, is this what we are having, a conversation and a dialogue. You see from and you hear from different people like Tiffany. I feel her pain, but it's good that we all are together as a community, um, hearing it, seeing how conversations are evolving. So I would feel that this is one of the best practices in my view. Over.
Thank you so much, Hadra. I hope I'm saying your name right. But, I think what you shared is so, so, so key. And I'm just also here just taking notes and everything. And I think a space like this is always an opportunity to learn so much from each other, but also provide the needed support for each other. So just encouraging everyone to just feel free to keep sharing whatever best practices that they may have. And I'm just looking at the time. I'm going to open it up for another 5 minutes, and I want to respect each and every one of you's time as well, but we'll give it 5 more minutes to just hear from others, to just share and reflect. We have, I think there were 2 people that had their hands raised. I think if I'm saying this name right, Jael, Jael, and Saudamini. If I'm saying them wrong, please correct me. But yeah, Jael and Saudamini, do you want to come in?
Hello. Hi. Hello. Can you hear me?
We can hear you perfectly. Go ahead.
All right. Okay. My name is Jael. I'm a student at the university here in Nairobi. Currently, we are having a campaign, Campus Me Too, to end sexual harassment and sexual grades in universities. My comment earlier was that I'm curious at the work currently concerning SGBV because there's a lot of victimization and stigma surrounding issues of sexual harassment and SGBV in particular, and there's a lot of process the government bureaucracies are holding, slowing down the work that we currently need to do to make our institutions safe for learning. And people haven't yet come to the realization that students are not pushing for something that it's, if I can put this in quotes, it's not us against them, but we want them to join our movement so that we can make our learning environment safe. So yeah, that's why I typed that I'm still furious at the amount of response that we are receiving concerning SGBV and sexual harassment in our learning institutions.
Thank you so much, Jael. And you know what? Student activism is sorry, my camera is a bit off so you can see my reaction, but I wanted to say, Jael, student activism is the way I started. I've got my own NGO called Her Liberty, and it literally started in my college years, where on the 14th of February, every Valentine's Day, we held a march which was called Kiss Her, Don't Hit Her. And it became like an annual thing just to kind of bring up the messages of, women want to be kissed and loved and not being treated in a very negative way. But just to share a bit of my personal journey and a bit of experience, but just to say that, with what you started, even in the college setup, there is a lot of issues that are happening around sexual violence and sexual harassment, and really just wishing you all well, and even support even from my side with whatever work that you're doing, since I've come from that journey as well. But yeah, there was someone else, Saudamini.
Yeah, hi, am I audible?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So yeah, I also wrote in the chat. So my only thing is that definitely we need infrastructures and we need support system for the victims, as we say. But I think it's also important to equally understand that, in childhood, how are we being conditioned? There's a very stark difference in the way daughters are brought up and sons are brought up. So apart from creating structures to really help people fight the violence against them, it's also really important to see and understand that how in childhood these gendered conversation take place. So I think that's also one of the areas we really need to work on in order to have a long-term effect and just eliminate this issue from by its root. So that's what I wanted to share. And this I said sad um, because it's not something that happens to a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old or 25-year-old. It also happens to a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old, by a 2-year-old and a 3-year-old. So it's also the way in our childhood, or the way we bring up children, or the way we have conversation in schools. I think that's also where we really need to change the words, the terminology, and bring in experiences, um, which encourages equality.
Yeah, I think with what you said, I'm kind of like, I'm on this hashtag thing, don't mind me, but hashtag, equality. And I think inequality has been the biggest key issues that have been coming out even from the speakers. And just to also encourage people to be following what's going on around generation equality. I don't know if people have heard of it, but next year there's a lot of work going on around generation equality. It's being led by UN Women, and there's different action groups focusing on different thematic areas, but it's the key issue is about the Beijing 25 commitment and gender equality. And I think it may be a platform and a space for a lot of us to be following, because I think they also will be sharing key tools and innovations, and even pushing through those who want to advocate for key recommendations, because I think they're advocating for government to make commitments around issues of gender equality around different themes. So gender-based violence actually has got its own coalition that's actually been looking at that. So for those who want to keep following and trying to find spaces to keep pushing some of the key issues and solutions that need to be brought forward. I just also, before I call into the others and also pass on to a colleague that will also support and continuously moderating this session, I really wanted to read out a comment from someone here that was really felt like this is what this person said. Just a little bit of my experience. I'm also considered stupid because of my traumatic experience of sexual-based violence by some guys. I really need some activism activities for this. I am sorry, I'm not afraid to talk about this in the video. I hope the speakers here can do something about this. I don't want any gender inequality. Please let us speak up. And I just wanted to just really lift up Irene, and to just say, Irene, you don't have to be sorry for speaking out and sharing your story, and to know that we, as how we are in this space, that there's so many people, women from different organizations and networks that you can always reach out to for any key support. And I think this is also what makes spaces like this so powerful, that we also begin to connect and gain the strength from each other, but even continuously after this session, seeing how best ways we can find ways to support you, to keep shining your light and keep being able to have the strength to keep speaking out. So there's no need to apologize for being able to speak out on your own experience and your own challenges. So just to say, we hear you and we're here for you, and we're here to support you as well. Yeah, I think there was someone else who wanted to come in. Let me just check my notes, because I'm taking notes of all the people coming in. So I am gonna call up Gobile. I hope I said that right. And as I call up Gobile, I'm also gonna have to pass on the moderation session. Did I say it right? Did I say it wrong? Gobile?
Yes, you said it right. It's Ngo.
It's Gobile.
Yes, Mobile.
Gobile. Okay, I was close. But the floor is yours. Please share your reflections.
All right. Thank you so much. I was going to say earlier, in terms of my context here in Zimbabwe, my word was going to be said, because what we thought we had gained, especially in terms of education and equality and access for girls, has really been washed away by the COVID-19. So even the issues of the safety of girls at home was compromised, because there is poverty in the homes. Many people can't afford food. Many girls are uncertain of whether they are going back to school or not. So this drives both the girl children and even the parents into prostitution, into selling sex, because they want to feed themselves and their families. There are widespread water challenges around, and the girl children have been spending time at home, going to fetch water and in queues. they've been abused in borehole queues, they've been exchanging sex for a bucket of water, so forth. So most of these girls are now pregnant now. And as the schools have been reopening, they are failing to go back to school. So this kind of abuse was a bit less before the lockdown and before the COVID, because the low-income families could do some vending and feed their children. But we now see that SGBV has been on the rise because of the COVID-19, which has worsened poverty levels. And now we are facing an upsurge in terms of child marriages, because sometimes in our context, when somebody falls pregnant, some traditions and cultures accept maybe a marriage offer, even without the bride price, as a solution to say, if somebody impregnates a child, if they then say, I will marry them, it becomes better with the parents because they know that in the future we are getting some form of money or security from the person who's marrying them. So yeah, many girls are also now having illnesses, STIs, because they were either raped or abused or took part in some risky behavior just trying to fend for themselves. So our fight in terms of SGB is really needs to be taken a notch higher, because now we are facing what we already faced before the COVID and what has been made worse, and our unpreparedness or our state of preparedness for disasters and pandemics has been exposed. And I just said to say the education of the girls is one of the hardest hit issues in terms of the effects of the COVID-19. Thank you.
No, thank you. I think you brought up something that we haven't really touched on as much during this conversation, has been the element of the vulnerability of the girls, even when it comes to issues of poverty. You know, the fact that the girls are becoming so vulnerable just for a bucket of water, as you shared. But there's even so much more. There've been so many stories of just girls being vulnerable just for food to eat at home because their parents have lost jobs because of the pandemic. So, you know, I think you're really touching on such a key thing. And I think that's why most of the speakers were saying the need to really look at these issues in a very holistic way and a cross-sectoral way as well is so, so, so critical. And at this moment, unfortunately, because of time, I'm going to have to jump off to another call and another session, but I wanted to pass it on to Fatou, but also come on a place to say that, you know what, we have got a strong voice together and collectively. And I feel like with all the expertise and even knowledge that's been shared on this session, that we should continue these conversations. But most importantly, let's find ways to work collectively, because I have noticed that the power of partnership and the power of collective engagement can really influence key platforms that we need to be speaking these key issues and the key problems and the solutions. So I will also leave my email address on the chat. Feel free to always get in touch with me, and I'm looking forward for many more conversation and engagements with any of you and this platform itself. So thank you. Fatou, I'm going to hand it over to you to just continue.
Thank you, Tikhala. That was great. All right, so we're really over time, but this conversation is so important. So over to Yandi, and then we'll hand it over to Catherine to close us off. Yandi?
It's not something very far-fetched from what everyone else has said, just to say that I think this whole panel and this whole discussion gives me hope for a better future. But one of the things that I also wanted to talk about is, I think with school-related gender-based violence, I think we also need to talk about it in the online sphere and what online harassment has done, particularly for young girls and women who have been involved digitally, for those who, of course, are not affected by the gender-digital divide. So I think it's something we need to have communication on and classify it and talk about it, especially as schools are reopening, and ensure that we're intensifying this mobilization and these counselors and this safe space and brave space for girls within schools to report all these cases of online harassment, and that there's seriousness taken with that. So that's something that I wanted to say. But above all that, everyone has said they're tired, and I think that's a really good sign. We're tired and we're ready to move, and we're tired and we're ready to be changed.
Thank you, Yande. Yeah, that digital space as a space for me, it's a site of evidence, it's a site of activism, it's a site of engagement, and I think it really should be integrated and mainstreamed across all institutional formalized processes. So thank you for highlighting that. All right, well, over to Catherine to wrap us up.
Thank you so much, Fatou, and thank you to everyone. I have the great privilege and honor of having the last words. It's such a fantastic session, and I think having these sessions, safe spaces for young people, young women, and feminists to come together to build South solidarity, to advance gender justice, and to demand our rights to education, and to push back and resist patriarchal violence is more important than ever. I think this space was critical and a really fantastic and important way to engage during 16 days of activism. This youth solidarity is really absolutely critical. So thanks to everyone. It's been such a pleasure listening. I just wanted to take us back. Ungai convened us quite a lot earlier this year. We've really come far. We've dialogued, we've debated, we've shared strategies and struggles and tactics for advocacy to advance gender just education. We've drafted recommendations and demands, and we've built solidarity across our borders. And across our issues to fight for our social and economic rights and our right to education, and to resist this shadow, as Madeleine said, that follows women, queer, and gender diverse people across the globe. So just for the sake of going full circle, just going back to Nafe's poem. And really inspired by her words, let us not temper our flames and let us not restrict our fires. And our hope, and Tiffany mentioned that she's got hope. A few of you have said you've got more hope from this session. Let's let that hope fan our feminist flames. And let's remain uncomfortable and let's remain disruptive, as a lot of you have suggested on this call, and let's burn massive fire breaks in the path of patriarchy, which is fueling gender-based violence and gender inequality. And let's burn massive fire breaks in the path of corporates, private interests, and international financial institutions that are pushing austerity, that are pushing privatization of education, and that are threatening our teachers, that are threatening their unions, and our right as young people to education and gender responsive education. So just a call to action to let's remain uncomfortable and let's burn it down. And just final words to say thank you so much to Ungai for convening us all this while, and for all the amazing work that you've done to bring us together. And it's obviously a special shout out to Gloria and Natasha. It's been an absolute pleasure to collaborate with you as a representative of ActionAid's Youth Working Group. It's really been a privilege. And thank you to Fatou and Tikhala for holding this space and for facilitating us. It was really incredible. You're amazing. And last but certainly not least, thank you mostly to all the young education advocates and the activists and the feminists on this call. Thank you so much for staying with us. Thanks for participating. Thanks for your contributions. We really appreciate it. And our workers, we have a lot of work to do. So let's not stop here. Let's continue our struggle for gender justice and our right to education. Thank you so much.